Georgia O'Connor here. Big up Julius. Ring IQ. Welcome to the relay.
Welcome to the relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
She's a former world champion, but it's a fight I've got to believe in myself, and it's a fight I believe I can win. So I'm sure it'll be a good fight and one I'm looking forward to. Definitely, I want Shannon Courtney next, beat her. Then I want Ebanie Bridges, take her bout, and then we'll look at the other title holders as well. My ultimate goal was to become world champion, so I've achieved that. Now it's to get a few more belts. So I'm not looking too far ahead. I'm just looking at getting another belt or two would be nice.
It is conceivable that Nina Hughes' very next fight, her very first defense of her newly obtained WBA title,
she might get what she wants. She may get Shannon Courtney in the ring in her very next fight. It's only right.
Shannon Courtney, the former WBA champion who lost WBA title to Jamie Mitchell, who then lost that same WBA title to Nina Hughes.
I often talk about how Shannon Courtney was fighting injured in the Jamie Mitchell fight. I don't think that elicits much sympathy.
Shannon isn't everybody's cup of tea, but even if that doesn't elicit sympathy, it should at minimum elicit understanding.
She's a very formidable fighter when she's got two good legs under her, and she's got a quality right hand.
And Nina Hughes beating Jamie Mitchell, who beat Shannon Courtney, doesn't necessarily mean that Nina beats Shannon as well.
Because boxing math don't work like that.
Nina Hughes was able to pry away the WBA title from Jamie because she was better in the pocket than Jamie, better within close quarters.
She was busy. She was getting off good, clean shots in the pocket.
But it's a different fight with Shannon Courtney. Shannon Courtney, who I reiterate, when she's got two good legs under her, she can be very formidable, manage the distance and set up that backhand.
She was fighting injured in the Jamie Mitchell fight, and she has since had the corrective surgery, has since recovered from that surgery, rebounded off the loss to Jamie Mitchell.
She was in action late last year in December opposite the ring journeywoman Gemma Rueg.
Had that tune-up fight.
Got herself back in the winner's bracket. I think she's about as ready as she's going to be for Nina Hughes. But is Nina ready for Shannon? It's a very different fight than the Jamie Mitchell fight was.
I don't think Shannon's going to spend as much time in the pocket trading punches as Jamie did.
She can stick and move, stay on the outside, set up the right hand, and the onus will be on Nina Hughes to close the distance and get off punches. Could be difficult because I think Shannon's a little taller than Nina and a little longer.
She can handle pressure. We saw that in the Ebanie Bridges fight.
If Nina does try to pressure her, tries to crowd her, Shannon Courtney won't be in unfamiliar territory.
Whoever wins, they get Ebanie Bridges.
The outcome of that fight between Nina and Shannon sets up the unification match with Ebanie, which I assume would go down perhaps in the third or fourth quarter of this year, it being that Ebanie is still recuperating from hand surgery.
I don't think she goes straight into a unification match under those circumstances. I think Ebanie will likely take a tune-up fight, a little keep busy fight, a little easy one.
It was a very productive year last year for Ebanie Bridges. She kicked off the year opposite the ring, then IBF champion Maria Cecilia Roman won a decisive decision, took on her longtime rival and countrywoman Shannon O'Connell and stopped her.
She capped off the year with that knockout.
Silenced a lot of critics, silenced a lot of naysayers, but it only gets harder from here on out at this level, championship level, facing other champions, other good fighters, great fighters.
Ebanie in many ways is the most recognizable fighter and the most recognizable champion at this weight, even if she's not the longest reigning.
The longest reigning champion at this weight is Yulihang Luna, who became WBC champion in late 2020 opposite the ring Mexican legend Bobby Juarez, who she battered, beat decisively.
Yulihang Luna is actually this division's longest reigning champion, though not the most well-known. She became a champion in 2020. Dina Thorslund became a champion at this weight in 2021.
Both Ebanie and Nina became champions the following year, in 2022, but among them,
Ebanie is the most well-known, thus she's the one with the most targets on her back. Heavy is the head that wears the crown. That's what they say.
Nina's gunning for her. But first, she's got to get through Shannon Courtney, and she wants that fight. She wants to afford Shannon that opportunity.
Yeah, Shannon's not a mandatory or anything like that. The WBA haven't ordered that fight per se.
Nina knows what she's doing, and she knows what it means if she can beat Shannon Courtney. She knows that sets up an Ebanie Bridges fight. Ebanie, who's going to be out for the foreseeable future, at least for a little while. She'll likely come back in either the third or fourth quarter of this year.
She's going to keep busy with Shannon while she waits.
And as stated, Shannon Courtney may not be everybody's cup of tea, but she is a formidable fighter with two good legs under her and a quality right hand. So getting through her could be difficult for Nina. I look forward to seeing that fight made.
Get the impression that it's not done yet.
Hasn't been announced, but I believe that it soon will be. Keep your eyes peeled for that. Keep your eyes peeled for Nina Hughes versus Shannon Courtenay. In other news, the continued fallout of the WBC's recent ruling, their investigation into Conor Benn's positive drug test, that there is no conclusive evidence he intentionally, knowingly ingested clomiphene. WBC accepted Benn's highly elevated consumption of eggs as reasonable explanation for positive tests, even if most of the boxing community doesn't.
Is that the stupidest thing you ever heard, or is that the stupidest thing you ever heard?
It actually isn't. Testing positive for nandrolone as a result of eating wild boar testicles, that's one of the dumber things I've heard.
Who said that?
Tyson Fury a couple of years ago, but the BBBOC, they're standing firm. They're standing on their square, saying the British Boxing Board of Control Limited, the BBBOC, is aware that the WBC has considered two positive findings in relation to Mr. Conor Benn, who, at the time the relevant samples were taken in 2022, was a license holder with the BBBOC.
Okay.
And the BBBOC has not been party to the review conducted by the WBC and has not been provided with sight of any evidence submitted on Mr. Benn's behalf. The BBBOC is aware that the WBC has concluded its own review into at least one of the two positive findings and reached its own decision. Published today, the 22nd of February 2023, for clarity, whilst the BBBOC wishes to make clear that it respects the WBC is a sanctioning body and not a governing body. The BBBOC was the governing body with whom Mr. Benn was licensed at the material time, and as such, any alleged anti-doping violation shall be dealt with in accordance with its rules and regulations.
I told you.
The BBBOC has adopted the UK anti-doping rules published by UK Anti-Doping, UKAD, and those formed part of the rules to which Mr. Benn was bound. As such, the decision of the WBC does not affect the ongoing implementation of the BBBOC's rules and those of UKAD. The UK Anti-Doping rules make it clear what conduct constitutes an anti-doping rule violation as defined in those rules and in the World Anti-Doping Code, and specifically set out the circumstances in which such violations can be committed by way of strict liability.
They said a mouthful.
In a nutshell, whatever decision the WBC reached on their own due to their own research, their own investigation, it has no bearing on the BBBOC's stance on this, their decision.
Sounds a lot like they're still waiting for Conor to prove his innocence to them because they haven't cleared him, even if the WBC has.
That's what I told you would happen. The WBC can reach whatever conclusions they want to reach. At the end of the day, you don't get a boxing license from the WBC. You do get a boxing license from the BBBOC.
You get it from them.
But it does create a conundrum because the BBBOC don't work in tandem with VADA. They work in tandem with UKAD, and Conor Benn was clear.
He didn't test positive for any banned substances by way of UKAD. The adverse finding was in the VADA tests.
Like I said, the BBBOC don't work in tandem with VADA.
So what the hell's their problem?
Billy Joe Saunders tested positive for oxylofrin ahead of what was supposed to be the Demetrius Andrade fight. His VADA tests came back positive for oxylofrin, but that had no bearing on the BBBOC or UKAD.
They didn't penalize him for testing positive for a banned substance with another anti-doping agency.
They didn't do anything. So why are they all of a sudden so worried about what a VADA test says when they don't work in tandem with VADA?
You weren't worried about it with Billy, so why are you worried about it with Conor?
With all this pearl clutching I'm seeing, a Twitter user that goes by the name Chris Rob Will stated, "I expected much better from a serious journalist like Matt Lawton. Dear me, quote-unquote, cleared, what hope do we have?"
None, because you're a fucking hypocrite.
Among a lot of other fucking hypocrites pretending to care about wanting a cleaner sport while cheering on guys like Tyson Fury.
You don't care about doping in the sport of boxing because if you did, you wouldn't be a fan of that guy.
And Conor Benn's egg-splanation, pun intended,
ridiculous as that may sound,
is no more and no less ridiculous than Tyson Fury telling UKAD he tested positive for nandrolone as a result of eating boar testicles.
Why the fuck would you be eating boar testicles?
I mean, you would sooner scarf down a bunch of eggs than a bunch of boar testicles. One is a little bit more plausible than the other.
Even if they're both ridiculous.
But you see, that's the point. What's with all the pearl clutching?
Anthony Fowler stated, money talks and boxing is now tainted as a sport. You can cheat, fail 2 tests, and it doesn't matter because you can afford expensive lawyers who who can come out with some bullshit about eating eggs.
Or boar testicles in the case of Tyson Fury. Luis Ortiz said he was so hungry he could eat a horse, and that's where the nandrolone in his system came from. Jarrell Miller, he said he bought some gas station dick pills.
And that's where the banned substances found in his system came from.
So what's Anthony Fowler? He been living under a rock? He's saying that now boxing is a tainted sport? Now?
All of a sudden, because of Conor Ben.
Oh, now it's a tainted sport, as opposed to what it was before. What was it before? I'll tell you what it was before. The same fucking sport it is now.
It's the same shit. It's all the same shit. It's just people want to act different because it's Conor Ben.
Hall of Fame promoter Lou DiBella is a prime example, saying hashtag boxing has no meaningful ped regulations.
Damn right it doesn't. It's a revolving door policy. How do you think your guy, Jean Pascal, found his way back to the sport?
Jean Pascal tested positive for 4 separate banned substances, EPO among them.
There's only so many ways that can get into your system because the body don't produce it itself.
4 separate banned substances were found in Jean Pascal's system in June, circa June of 2021. And in spite of all of this, that didn't stop Lou DiBella from picking him up.
It's not stopping Lou DiBella from working with that guy.
He says boxing has no meaningful ped regulation. You're damn right it doesn't. That's how your buddy Jean Pascal is still out here getting fights.
And in spite of the 4 banned substances they found in that guy's system in 2021, that didn't stop you from bidding on his fight with Joshua Buatsi in 2022.
I didn't forget about that purse bid last year or that Lou DiBella won it.
Don't pretend that you're part of the solution. If there's a problem, you're just as much a part of that problem as everybody else.
You're just as much an enabler as everybody else.
You're not above working with a guy that tested positive for a banned substance, let alone 4, so why are you clutching at your pearls when it comes to Conor Ben?
Oh, I see. You don't buy Conor Ben's explanation. Well, what was Jean Pascal's explanation for the 4 banned substances they found in his system?
I don't see you talking about that. I don't see you being worried about that.
And you know that Lou DiBella is in association with Jean Pascal's next fight, the next fight he's about to have with Michael Eifert, that IBF final eliminator?
Lou is involved with that fight, all whilst virtue signaling in reference to Conor Ben's situation.
With all of his moral outrage and moral authority clutching at his pearls.
What are you telling me? You think that Conor shouldn't be allowed to box because of the clomiphene? Does that also apply to Jean Pascal and the EPO?
And don't forget the other 3 substances.
You guys are a bunch of hypocrites.
And because you're a bunch of hypocrites, I get the sense that this ain't about doping in the sport of boxing. This is about sticking it to somebody else. Sticking it to Matchroom and sticking it to Eddie Hearn. If I had to guess what's really motivating all this
moral outrage.
This ain't about doping in the sport of boxing, I'll tell you that.
Because if it were, I hardly think you'd attach yourself to John Pascal's next fight, but you did, didn't you?
And finally, the latest on a story that we've been following here on the channel, what's next for Showtime? A strategic review is underway of Showtime and Paramount Plus content will result in impairment or abandonment charges of $1.3
to $1.5 billion.
Management's discussion and analysis of results of operations and financial condition continued tabular dollars in millions except per share amounts. For 2022, content costs increased 9%, reflecting investment in content for our streaming services and higher costs associated with theatrical releases, partially offset by costs in 2021 from CBS broadcast of the Super Bowl. In January of 2023, we announced that we will be fully integrating Showtime into Paramount Plus across both streaming and linear platforms later in 2023. In connection with this plan, we have undertaken a comprehensive strategic review of the combined content portfolio of Showtime and Paramount Plus. At the same time, we are rationalizing and right-sizing our international operations to align with our streaming strategy and closing or globalizing certain of our international channels. We plan to complete this review in the first quarter of 2023 and abandon or remove from our platforms certain content which will result in charges for the impairment or abandonment of the affected content, which we estimate will be approximately 1.3 to 1.5 billion.
They're trimming the fat. They're still trimming the fat.
Earlier this month, It was announced by way of Variety that Showtime had already laid off 120 employees. Now, Stefan Espinoza, president of Showtime Boxing, Stefan was not one among them.
I don't know, man.
It's not looking good. You want to know what the viewership numbers were for the Ray Vargas versus Oshaki Foster fight? The viewing figures were 162,000 viewers on Showtime. Just 162,000.
Ranking it at 127th on cable at that time.
So while the news just a week or so ago may have been that Stefan would continue in his role as the president of Showtime Sports, moving over to CBS Sports, reporting to David Burson, president of CBS Sports.
Well, he may still have a job. The question is for how long, with viewing figures like that.
I heard something a week or so ago about a celebration upon this news breaking, that Stefan would continue as Showtime Sports president for the time being, and I heard something about a celebration in the Twitter spaces, which he sometimes occupies, and I thought to myself, that seems premature.
And they're not out of the woods yet. They're just getting started. They've already laid off 120 Showtime employees.
That was just the first wave of layoffs. There could very well be more later on this year. They're just getting started.
That's how these things work. First upper level management goes
Down to the ground level, forcing those employed at Showtime to justify their continued employment, their continued presence on the platform at a time when their higher-ups are trimming the fat.
I mean, what do you think they mean when they say that they're planning to abandon or remove from their platforms certain content?
What content do you think they have in mind? Perhaps content that isn't bringing new eyes to the platform? Content that ranks in 127th?
On a Saturday night.
Is this your way of trying to keep up with the Joneses and compete with the UFC on ESPN that ranked in at number 1 that same day?
Is this your way of trying to keep up with them and compete with them? Because if it is, it's not working.
And Showtime, at its base, is not a sports network.
That's what I'm telling you.
They might decide to cut their losses and take those resources, whatever resources was going into that content, reallocate them to something else.
They might.
Because, if nothing else, what's clear is that that content isn't delivering much of anything to their platform. It's not even me rooting for them to fail or hoping that they do. It's just the reality of the situation that they're in.
This ain't me hoping that Stefan Espinoza gets the axe, that the guy loses his job.
And that the PBC gets thrown out on the street. This isn't me rooting for that to happen. This is me telling you, based on what I'm looking at, it could happen.
It might.
Boxing, combat sports, sports in general aren't what drum up business for a premium cable network like Showtime. It just isn't.
They're hanging on by a thread. And if those cards, those boxing matches happening on Showtime, if they would have brought in better viewership,
better numbers, then they wouldn't have anything to worry about.
so long as it's bringing eyes to the platform.
But it isn't. And what fights are decent fights that might garner more interest than what's on their regular schedule, those fights are tucked away behind a paywall.
All those pay-per-views.
Most of which haven't been officially announced. Not yet. Like Spence versus Thurman or Wilder versus Ruiz.
Situation like this, you want to be on stable ground. And I'm not sure that the PBC is.
Or Stefan Espinoza.